the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Buckeyes, your daily podcast on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Buckeye fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Buckeyes for the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jay Stevens, also the host of the Jay Stevens Podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com and tell them Locked On sent you. It is Tuesday, July 27th in the year 2021. And no matter if you're listening to the audio version of the podcast or if you're watching us on YouTube or WKYC.com, I want to thank you for making Locked On Buckeyes a part of your day. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at JStevens07. You can also follow the podcast on Twitter as well at Locked On Buckeye. Lineup for today, we will be joined by Dan Hope from 11warriors.com as Sam and I spent some time recapping Big Ten Media Days. From Kevin Warren kicking things off to day one, where Jim Harbaugh made a statement that went all around the social media, to day two, where Ohio State coach Ryan Day, players Thayer Munford, Jeremy Ruckert, and Zach Harrison dominated all the attention. We're going to recap all that and then some right here with Dan Hope from 11warriors.com. As always, make sure you subscribe or follow to Locked On Buckeyes on the Odyssey app, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your fine podcast. Subscribe on the YouTube channel as well. You guys are doing a phenomenal job of helping build this thing with your own help of watching and subscribing to the podcast, to the YouTube channel. Keep it up. Tell your family, tell your friends, even that guy that might be, guy or girl, that might fit the faux category. Tell them, because you know they love Ohio State, so they can keep up to date with Locked On Buckeyes just like you do. So I am going to back away, literally back away. Bring in Dan Hope from 11warriors.com as him and I recap days 1 and 2 from Big Ten Media Days. And joining us now here on Locked On Buckeyes, it is Tuesday. We're going to try to get into a trend of having guests every Tuesday once again, even throughout the season. It is Dan Hope from 11 Warriors, a gentleman that I got to meet at Big Ten Media Days this past Thursday and Friday in Indianapolis at Lucas Oil Stadium. Dan, welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was great to finally meet you last week.
It was. Have you attended Big Ten Media Days before?
Yeah, I've been every year that they've had them since I've been back here at 11 Warriors. So they obviously didn't have them last year, but other than that, I've been there every year.
What was it like for you as someone that's attended this media availability basically for players and coaches? What was it like for you to be back in that environment, listening to all 14 Big Ten coaches and getting around talking to players as well?
Man, it was really refreshing. I mean, after a year of doing this, I was thinking just as I logged on, like it's been a while since I've done one of these Zoom things here because for much of a past year, that just became life, doing these Zooms like 3 or 4 times a week, doing all the interviews on there. But it's great to be going back and doing interviews in person again, talking to players and coaches in person again, because it just feels so much more natural. And, I liked having Big Ten Media Days at Lucas Oil Stadium too. I think a lot of people agreed, but I think that it was a cool venue to have it. It felt it felt a little cooler, a little bigger to have it in the stadium than to have it in a hotel ballroom. And so I kind of hope they keep doing that because, for one, Indianapolis is a little bit easier drive from Columbus, and two, I think having it there in that venue, I think kind of makes the event feel a little bigger.
It did feel big. This is my first time going to Big Ten Media Days, so this is all first time, kind of like a kid in a candy shop. I'm just excited to be there, getting to hear Kevin Warren speak to people for the first time. We'll touch on that here in a second. All the players there. I was kind of in awe. I was very excited to be there. I do think that the stadium really was a great setting, and it's also great for Ryan Day, Ohio State players, and everybody else in the Big Ten say, We're going to start here, and hopefully at the end of the regular season, Dan, we end here with the Big Ten championship game.
Yeah, when I first saw Ryan Day on Friday, I was talking to him, and he made a comment about being in the stadium, and I joked to him. I said, "You're used to being here, right? But think of it, Jim Harbaugh. This was his first time there as Michigan's head coach. So yeah, definitely cool for all those different coaches and players to kind of be in that setting, and now they all start the journey of trying to get back there.
Exactly. I know Ohio State has big plans, big aspirations for the season. You want to start here. You want to get there, Big Ten championship. Get there for the national championship game as well this year. So many things to go into the Ohio State season. But I want to start with what we saw first, what we heard from first individual that spoke. Kevin Warren got a lot of heat over the past year for the way he handled things around COVID, ramping things up, getting a schedule, canceling, and then going back. He made some weird comments, interesting comments, some things that I wrote down, and I wish I didn't hear them. But from what you kind of took away from Kevin Warren and what he said, what were some big takeaways from that little 26-minute little ordeal before letting the media speak?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of zoned out there during that 26-minute filibuster because, hearing him talk on and on about, the tradition of the conference and all that, I think most of us are all thinking, let's get to the questions here. Let's get to the questions. And then, even when we got to the questions, I mean, most of them he wasn't really answering them. So there really wasn't a whole lot of substance. And to me, I thought the biggest takeaway came from the very last question where he was asked if he had any regrets. And he said he didn't have any regrets and that he would make the same decisions, all the same decisions that he made last year. And to me, I kind of heard that and I'm like, really? Like, you have no regrets? There's nothing you would have done differently? I'm not saying that he necessarily deserved all the criticism he's gotten over the past year because a lot of these decisions were made by the presidents and chancellors. And in some ways, he's just kind of a public face of it. He's the guy who has to take the heat. That's part of a commissioner's job. But to go up there and say that he had no regrets, to go up there and say that they would do everything the same way, to me, that's just not understanding your constituents. It's not understanding the Big Ten fans and the players and coaches and the way they reacted to what happened last year, the way that some of the ways the Big Ten went about its decisions affected them in terms of the uncertainty and in terms of a reaction to that. I didn't expect him to go up there and say that, no, we should have just gone full speed ahead. We never should have postponed anything in the first place. I didn't expect that. But to me, I think at the very least for him to go up there and say, we could have communicated better, or, we could have done some things differently. I think that would have resonated better with people than to just go up there and say, yeah, we would have done it all the same way we did it, because obviously a lot of people still disagree with the way they did it last year.
Yeah, it was weird. It was a weird little ordeal. I remember there was a question. There was somebody sitting in front of me, maybe second row, that had some type of story. I don't know the story. I know that it was a kid that got on the plane for the very first time. He asked Kevin Warren a question. Kevin Warren acknowledged the individual, said that I know your story, but completely dodged the question that the young man asked, or young man or woman, I forget what it was. And that to me was kind of took me back, and it's like, you're dodging everything. I understand, like, you want to deflect. I understand you want to be very, very vanilla with your responses, but you won't even acknowledge the question that somebody's asking you. You acknowledge your story, but don't even really recognize what they're saying to you. That was an eye-opener to me. Now, I don't know if this is the way he is as a lawyer, because I know he was practicing law for a while. I don't know. I would venture probably not, because if you're a lawyer for a long time, you can't do stuff like that and be very, very successful. So I'm curious, and I wonder how he's going to evolve and how Barry Alvarez, being their special advisor for football, will assist and aid Kevin Warren with communication to coaches, to players, to ADs, because if things don't get better, he's going to be really under some hot water, and coaches and people will be very upset because of the way that he's leading the conference.
Well, to me, if he didn't learn from last year that he needs to be better about communicating about these things, then how is he going to learn? I mean, you're not going to. I mean, what else does it take? So to me, last week was a big opportunity for him to show some better communication chops and to kind of show a different side of him, to kind of try to connect with the players and coaches and fans better. And to me, he just missed the mark. He just didn't do that. And, I just don't know if I see that changing. I think it's just kind of a way that he's wired, that when he's at these events, he's going to speak in that very corporate, lawyer-like speak. And the reality is that's just not going to resonate with the fans of your conference. That's not what people want to hear. They don't want to hear a bunch of legalese and a bunch of winding long answers. They want to feel like you're talking to them. And I just don't feel like he's been able to do that.
No, I don't think so either. Let's get away from Kevin Warren. We could talk about him all day. Let's get to day 2. I'll come back to day 1 here in a second. Ryan Day, Jeremy Ruckert, Thayer Mumford, Zach Harrison were kind of the center of attention. They dominated everything. I know when Ryan Day approached the hour-long media portion where he was answering questions, he had the biggest section out of everybody. Now, I missed day 1 when Harbaugh and all the other coaches, James Franklin, were speaking. I had to step away for that, so I missed that portion. But from everything I saw on Twitter, Ryan Day's section was the biggest. And what were some big takeaways you got from Ryan Day speaking during that hour session?
Well, when you're the 4-time defending champion of the Big Ten, you are going to draw the most attention. So no doubt, Ohio State coaches and players were the ones drawing the biggest crowds. And I think talking to him, I think there were a few interesting things that we learned last week. For one, we learned that the Palaie Naiteote situation, that's still kind of up in the air in terms of his eligibility with the NCAA. We learned they're going to start camp next Tuesday, so we are coming right up on it a week here from now. They're going to be in camp. They're going to be practicing for the start of the season, and that it sounds like most of the team is going to be healthy, which is good news for Ohio State. Cameron Babb's a guy who's still out, but a lot of those guys who were out this spring, like Sevyn Banks and Haskell Garrett, Dallas Gant, Court Williams, Cam Brown, those guys are all going to be back. So that's a really important step. In terms of quarterbacks, we didn't learn much. We learned that, he's still saying it's even. He's not going to tip his hand there. Did say, as he had said coming out of a spring, that he hopes to make a decision within the first 2 weeks of preseason camp. So there's a chance here that by mid-August that competition could be decided and a starter could be named. But, he's going to continue to give all those guys reps throughout August, because you never know what could happen. And then, we also learned that, he said a majority of the team is vaccinated, not everybody. He's hopeful that we'll get close to 100%, but Ryan Day did say that they're not going to require vaccinations for players. So, hopefully they will be at a point where there won't have to worry about any potential disruptions, but sounds like there could still be the potential for COVID to affect the team, even if on a small scale this year.
Got a question for you, because you mentioned something about the quarterback competition about 2 weeks before the season, knowing who QB1 will be. Do you think waiting until 2 weeks prior to the season start, 2 weeks prior before the season starting, do you think that timetable is wise? Would you alter that? Would you change it? What do you think about that timetable that Ryan Day has given us?
I think that timetable makes perfect sense, because you're talking about 3 guys who have never thrown a pass in a college game before. So I think allowing those guys to take what they learned in the spring, continue to work on it on their own in the summer, and then have a chance for a couple weeks in August to show how much they've improved over the course of that time. I think that is a good way to go about it. I think it's a strategic way to go about it, because the reality is, if you had come out of spring and said, CJ Stroud's our starting quarterback, you could potentially lose the other 2 guys to the transfer portal. Now, July 1 was the deadline to transfer and play elsewhere this year. Even if you name a starter, the week 1 of preseason camp, those other 2 guys probably aren't going to transfer, at least not this year, because they wouldn't be able to play anywhere this year anyway. So I think that's certainly part of it. But then I think it's also the fact that, you want to see these guys develop over the course of a year. I mean, none of these guys, CJ Stroud and Jack Miller have been on campus since January 2020, but, none of these guys have really played at all at Ohio State. So I think giving them the opportunity to compete for a couple weeks of preseason camp makes a lot of sense. But I do think that, what he's saying is true, but I think after a couple weeks, I think you do need to make a decision because I don't think you want to be going into the season. You think back to what happened back in 2015 where Urban Meyer let that JT Barrett, Cardale Jones battle go right up to the start of a season. And it caused problems that really never got fixed all year because they just weren't in sync as an offense. And so I think it is important there that once you start really turning the page to, okay, we got to prepare for Minnesota, we got to prepare for week 1, that you do have a starting quarterback, that he is taking the majority of the first team reps. But I think those first couple weeks, most people think CJ Stroud is the front runner. I think he probably is, but I do think it makes sense to have actual competition there and to see what all three of them can do.
He also made a comment, I think it was on the second time when he was in the hour-long session, where he talked about how there would be a lot of freshmen, quite a few freshmen playing this year. The first names people think about is Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, and the possibility of them being in the Rushman package for the defensive line this year. That gets me excited. JTT could be a two-sport athlete. I'm hearing he's probably going to walk onto the basketball team. Holtman and Day, they're fine with that. What do you think about the freshman class and the possibility of seeing quite a few of them play this year?
Yeah, it's a really talented freshman class. That's the thing. There are a lot of really talented players in this class. And, you think back to the spring, 5 different guys losing their black stripes. I think that tells you how advanced a lot of those guys are. So I think you look at guys like Jack Sawyer, like Travion Henderson, like Marvin Harrison Jr., like Emeka Ibuka. Those are all guys who were at Ohio State for spring practice. They had really good springs. Those are all guys I expect to see on the field this year. JT Tuimoloau, much like Jack Sawyer, I think they're both guys that are so talented, they're probably only going to be at Ohio State for 3 years. So you want to find roles for them in year 1. I think the Rushman package is a perfect way to get those guys on the field early and then see how their roles grow over the course of a year. I lean toward believing that Jack Sawyer is going to play more this year than JT, mostly because of the fact that Jack's been on campus since January and JT just got here in July. So I think JT, I think especially early in the year, I wouldn't be surprised if Jack's getting more snaps than JT, but I do think both those guys are going to have a role in some capacity. And then, there's some other guys too that, certainly could potentially work their way in there. You look at a position like cornerback, there's still some uncertainty there. Maybe Ja'Kalen Johnson or Jordan Hancock pushes for a spot in that rotation. I don't think Donovan Jackson's going to start as a freshman on the offensive line, but maybe he gets a spot on Matudi. Maybe he gets some snaps. Maybe, a guy like Mike Hall pushes for some playing time at defensive tackle. So, I think there's a lot of guys in this class who are capable of contributing early. Just how much they will contribute, I don't know. But, I certainly think there's some guys in this class who have a chance to make an impact in 2021.
Last but not least, Jim Harbaugh, go back to day 1, like I mentioned. When Bill Rabinowitz asked him that question, and I was looking at Jim Harbaugh the entire time, not Bill, in the question we're talking about, Dan remembers, Bill asked about Jim Harbaugh and Michigan winning the Big Ten Conference, but specifically beating Ohio State, which they have not done since Jim Harbaugh has taken over as head coach at the University of Michigan. And so Jim Harbaugh, I'm watching Jim. I'm not watching Bill. I'm watching Jim. And I can see his face change. I can see him kind of squirm a little bit, not really get too animated. You can see his whole facial expression change as he's hearing the question and he's knowing what this rivalry means to him. He says it's Ohio, not Ohio State. He said Michigan State's their rival. And then the quote that went all around social media, we're going to do it or die trying, talking about them winning the Big Ten championship, but specifically beating Ohio State. What were some thoughts going through your mind while Jim Harbaugh was answering that question?
Well, I just looked on Twitter and immediately you saw, get the grave ready. People are posting the GIF with the guys carrying the coffin and dancing. There was a lot of that. As soon as he said it, I know we looked at each other and yeah, we got to post something on that because we knew that was going to get a reaction out of Ohio State fans, as it should, because Ohio State has blown Michigan out the last 2 times they've played, and there seems to be a big gap between programs right now. And I don't think there's any real reason to believe that Jim Harbaugh is going to turn things around in this rivalry. But I will say this. When I hear him say that, when I hear Michigan players talk about how they're thinking about Ohio State every day and they're thinking about the rivalry every day, I think that's what they should be saying, because I remember going to Big Ten Media Days 2 years ago, and I remember asking Michigan players about Ohio State 2 years ago. And most of the responses were basically, yeah, Ohio State's important, but every game's important. And when you talk to Ohio State, they make no bones about it. We think about Michigan 365 days a year. They do the team up north drill and all that. And clearly that approach has worked for Ohio State. Michigan in past years, it seems like they've kind of wanted to shy away from that approach. Like, we don't want to put too much into one game. But guess what? Clearly, Ohio State has cared more about this rivalry in recent years. Clearly, they've been more prepared to play that game in recent years. So I think Michigan should be responding that way. You know, when I see the sign in the weight room or whatever, what are you doing to beat Ohio State today? Like, I think Michigan should be responding in that way, because this rivalry has become so one-sided toward Ohio State that, you know, Michigan, the more Michigan keeps losing that game, the harder it becomes to really see them turning it around and making it competitive. So I think that has to be their mindset. Does saying it in July mean anything in November? Not really. But I think, you know, that is the approach they should have, that, you know, they care about Ohio State. And I think that's what you should want to hear if you're an Ohio State fan, because I do think the recent results of this rivalry have caused the rivalry to lose some of its luster. And so you need Jim Harbaugh, you need players saying stuff like that to keep this rivalry burning hot.
I agree with you as well. Thad Mumford got a question about the rivalry, and he said he didn't feel that Michigan players were not taking it serious. And when he was hearing rumblings of the defense and people talking Michigan players in the offseason, he's like, I like that. But you mentioned something about the players and how they view the rivalry. Zach Harrison got a question about his goals for the season. He put them in this order. His words, not mine. Number 1, beat the team up north. Number 2, win the Big Ten championship game. Number 3, win every other game, win the rest of them. And that's his order. And I think for all Ohio State players and even fans, that game at the end of the regular season is always at the top. And I don't know what changed. I know that the talent there's a large gap in there, but I'm not sure when everything changed to where people thought, or Michigan players were responding to questions like you said. But I'm glad there's that appeal, there's that spice, there's something extra there going into game number 12 on the schedule, because that game has a lot of weight, and both fan bases only want one thing: for their team to win and for their team to destroy the other one.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I think obviously in the college football playoff era, Ohio State's ultimate goal is always going to be to win that national championship. But they're always going to put a premium on that Michigan game. They're always going to put a priority on that. And I think, you know, one of the ways they look at it is, you go, if we don't meet Michigan, then what else is going to happen after that? You know, they look at it like, you know, if we want to do anything in the postseason, we've got to finish our regular season by beating Michigan. So that's the approach that they've taken, and clearly it's worked for them. So that's certainly not going to change at Ohio State anytime soon. We'll see if Michigan looks any different this year than they have the last couple times going into that game.
Absolutely. Do you have any last comments about Big Ten Media Days from either day 1 or day 2, some things you'll kind of remember going into the season?
Man, I'm just glad we're getting here to football season, man. Like I think back to where we were last year at this time, and all we were talking about was, is the Big Ten going to cancel the season? And then ultimately they did, and, you know, then it got reinstated, and I mean, that was just no fun. I'm just glad, like, we got through Big Ten Media Days. Camp starts in a week, and games are going to be here in almost just a little over a month. Like, I'm just glad we're talking about football again. We're talking about conference realignment and NIL and all kinds of crazy other stuff too. But we're talking about football again. We're talking about an upcoming season, and that's what we really want at the end of the day.
Absolutely. Dan, if you could, let everybody know where they can catch you on Twitter, and also where they can read all of your work and some of the team that's there at 11 Warriors too.
Yep, you can follow me on Twitter at Dan_Hope, and You can go to 11warriors.com for coverage of Ohio State all day, every day. We're covering everything, mostly football this time of year, but basketball, there's commitments happening over there, all kinds of stuff. We try to cover it all. So as we get into preseason camp here and get towards the season, please check out 11warriors.com. We're going to be covering it all every day.
Exactly, guys. You guys can follow me on Twitter at jstevens07. We'll be back here Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday of this week, keeping you up to date, just like Dan, just here on the audio side, as there's a lot of stuff to talk about going into preseason camp, which starts August the 3rd.